Good evening, how are you? We've got a short show tonight. This is a very short page, and with God's help, we'll get through it relatively quickly. Let me just finish setting up my screen here. I had a little glitch. Okay, everything's good. Who is with us on a Sunday night as we light up the darkness? A little verklempt. There we go. Okay. Yes, who is with us on a Sunday night? Yehud in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bill in Missouri, Paula saying Erev Tov, good evening and hello. Bella in Florida, Joseph in Massachusetts, Lonnie says Shalom from Florida, Susan in Michigan, Melissa in Great Neck, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. We are doing page 41 here in Tractate Nazir, the 17th volume of the Talmud, the laws of the Oath of Naziris. We are in chapter 6. Today, not going to finish, but approaching the end of the discussion of Mishna number 2 in chapter 6. And generally, this second Mishnah, we've been talking about, first of all, that a default length of an oath of Naziris, a term of Naziris, when the Nazir vows in order to sort of reach this higher level of sanctity, which is unnecessary and even discouraged by the sages. But if he takes that oath, he's going to abstain from all produce of the grapevine, not become impure for the dead, not cut his hair, not shave his hair, not cut his hair in any way, as we've seen during the term of Naziris, and then bring the offerings that a Nazir brings upon the conclusion of his Naziris. Now, part of this prohibition is he cannot cut his hair, and as we learn, he can't cut his hair or pull his hair or use a depilatory to remove hair during the term of his Naziris. After he completes his days as a Nazir, he must shave his head, and when he does so with a razor, right? That's commanded, that it's with a razor, and that's, it doesn't say he shall shave with a razor, but it does say that during his term of Naziris, no razor will come upon his head until the completion of his days of Naziris. And from that, the sages learn out that when he completes his days, he must use a razor to shave his head. And then we saw that also the one-time dedication, consecration of the Levium, the Levites, when the children of Israel were in the desert and the Levites were originally appointed to their task, sort of being the assistants of the priests in handling all the matters of holiness surrounding the tabernacle and eventually the temple. The Levites were all shaved of all their body hair, and that was done with a razor. And then yesterday we spent some time deriving that a mitzora, right, one suffering from tzara'as, which we don't have it anymore, but in ancient times, and when the temple was standing, and you could bring the offerings of a mitzora, a person who has tzara'as, that part of his purification was also to remove all his hair. And it didn't say in the Torah that he had to use a razor, but the sages derived from sort of a combination of laws, commandments, positive commandments and negative commandments, that the Mitzorah also would have to use a razor to remove his hair when he removes his hair for that purification. And the sort of laws that were involved are this idea that the Mitzorah has to shave. It doesn't say with a razor. Other shaving commandments that are involved is that a priest is commanded not to shave off the corners of the beard, and all Jewish men are commanded not to destroy the corners of the beard, nor to round the head, right? And so when you talk about rounding the head or the corners of the beard, what they're getting at is this area here that sort of connects the hair on the scalp, at the forehead especially, with the hair of the beard. And so it's this area here, this triangle, and elsewhere in the Talmud, they get very specific about the exact, borders of that. But generally speaking, it's this triangle here. And so when you see certain Hasidic men, and it's not every denomination of Hasidic Jews that does this, Chabad, for example, does not, but many other Hasidic groups do, grow the payas, right? So the payas means the corner, right? The corners. Just like the paya of a field is the corner of a field, which we don't harvest and we leave that for the poor. So the payas of the scalp, the corners of the scalp are these corners here, and they will let those grow long. So from the commandment not to cut that, and then the razor gets involved, sort of, we're not going to go through the exact derivation right now. Some of it will come up tonight. But at any rate, they derive that when the Mitzorah shaves, he has to use a razor. So we pick this up on page 41a, a few paragraphs from the top. And as I mentioned before, it'll be a pretty short class. Okay, 41a. The Gemara asks, and Rabbi Eliezer, right, who disagrees with the majority of the rabbis, what is his reason? From where does he derive the law that a Metzorah must use a razor for his shaving of purification? He agrees with the rabbis that Metzorah has to use a razor when he does his shaving of purification, but he just derives it from a different location in the Torah. So Rabbi Eliezer derives it from the fact that the verse states with regard to a Metzorah, at Leviticus 14:9, he shall shave all his hair off his head and his beard. Right? And there's, you see the superfluous phrase. If you're going to shave all the hair off your head, well, presumably that would include your beard, which is on your head. And so now that the Torah has already said all the hair of his head and then adds and his beard, so Rabbi Eliezer is going to learn out an additional requirement from that phrase, that seemingly superfluous phrase. Right? So as it is taught in the Baraisa, why does the verse state his head if it already stated all his hair? It is because it is stated with regard, and that's another thing, right? If it already said all his hair, why do we even need to say his head or his beard? All his hair has to come off. Right? So with regard to the Metzorah, come on, computer, don't be glitchy. So with regard to the Metzorah, he shall shave all his hair off his head and his beard. And as it is taught in a Baraisa, why does the verse state his head if it already stated all his hair? It is because it is stated with regard to a Nazir, and as we're learning, these laws that involve shaving are considered as a group, as it were. And it is because it is stated with regard to a Nazir that no razor shall come upon his head. And therefore, one might have thought that the same should also apply to a Nazir who is a Metzorah. So Sharon, if you're here with us tonight, you asked this question at the end of yesterday's class, and we immediately come to this subject today. What happens when a Nazir contracts tzara'as during his period of Naziris? Right? So we saw that a Nazir, while he's a Nazir, is prohibited by a negative commandment from shaving his hair or removing any hair while he is a Nazir. On the other hand, a Metzorah, right, one who contracts tzara'as, impurity, he has to go through a purification which involves shaving his head, right, and shaving his whole body. So is the positive requirement to shave the body when you're a Metzorah going to come and override the negative commandment not to remove any hair while you are a Nazir? And I guessed yesterday, I think probably because, in my thinking, because the Metzorah is completely removed from society. He can't mix with people. A Nazir has very strong requirements of his Naziris, but, other than drinking wine or entering the cemetery or cutting his hair, he can mix freely with his society. The Metzorah has to remove himself from his community, and anytime he passes near people, call out, impure, impure, I am impure. So that's, just not a tenable state of affairs. So I figured that if a Nazir contracts tzara'as during his period of Naziris, he will go through that purification even though he has to cut his hair while he's a Nazir. And boom, here we have it. They don't give that same reasoning, but the principle does apply. So why does the verse state his head if it already stated all his hair? It is because it is stated with regard to a Nazir, no razor shall come upon his head. And therefore one might have thought that the same should also apply to a Nazir who becomes a Mitzorah during his Naziris. It should be prohibited for him to shave his head, even for the purification ritual of his tzaras. Therefore the verse states his head, to teach that a Nazir who is a Mitzorah must shave his head and do so with a razor. Now, being that a Nazir is prohibited only to use a razor, according to Eliezer's thinking perhaps, if a Mitzorah could fulfill his obligation to remove his hair using other implements, a Nazir who is a Mitzorah would not be permitted to use a razor. Therefore, it can be inferred from the law of a Nazir who is a Mitzorah that the only way for a Mitzorah to remove his hair is with a razor. Again, this groups these different laws working together to teach so that we can learn out that yes, you remove your hair and you shave it with a razor. And from that, we'll also learn out that according to Rabbi Eliezer at least, that when a Mitzorah is going through a purification and removing all his hair, it must be with a razor. Now, the Gemara rejects Eliezer's reasoning. And from where do you know that a Mitzorah must shave his head with a razor? We derived that yesterday, but now we're challenging it again. Perhaps even if the Mitzorah actually removed his hair with tweezers or with a wood plane, he performs the commandment. And if you would say, well, if so, why do I need the verse to teach me that he uses a razor? Through the derivation of the superfluous term, his hair, as above, so one could answer to Rabbi Eliezer, that is to say that he is permitted to shave even with a razor, as it might enter your mind to say that since with regard to a Nazir, when he performs the act of shaving with a razor, he is liable for transgressing the prohibition, so with regard to a Nazir who is a Mitzorah as well, he should also be liable even if he shaved for his tzaras. And the verse therefore teaches us that this is not the case. But it does not teach that a Mitzorah must use a razor. It just says that he's going to be excused if he uses a razor, but we haven't learned necessarily that when a Mitzorah shaves, he must use a razor. Now, according to that counter argument, but the Gemara rejects its own argument. If it should enter your mind that when a Mitzorah performs his hair removal with tweezers or a wood plane, that he performs his obligation, his commandment, then from the fact that the verse did not explicitly write razor with respect to the Mitzorah, it can be inferred that he is not allowed to use one, in accordance with the aforementioned principle of Reish Lakish, that one may not violate a prohibition even for the sake of a positive commandment, if it is possible to perform the positive commandment in a different manner. Rather, the verse must be coming to teach that the commandment of shaving a Mitzorah can be fulfilled only with a razor. Now, the Gemara asks, and the rabbis, with regard to this term, his head, which is referring to a Mitzorah, what do they learn from it? And the Gemara answers, they require this term to override the prohibition of rounding the corners of the head, right? You can't destroy the corners of the beard and you can't round the corners of the head, which is referring to, as it is taught in Baraisa with regard to the verse, you shall not round the corners of your heads. One might have thought that the same should apply also to the Mitzorah, that it should also be prohibited for him to round the corners of his head when he shaves. You might have thought that, okay, he has to, for the sake of his purification ritual, take all the hair off his body, but maybe he should leave the corners because we learn elsewhere in the Torah that you shall not round the corners of your head. You shall not shave that triangle of your hair. So maybe he's supposed to leave that there. One might have thought that the same should also apply to the Mitzorah. Therefore, the verse states his head with regard to the Mitzorah to teach you that he shaves all the hair off his body, including the hair of his head, including the corners of the scalp. Now, the Gemara asks, why do I need the Torah to write his head? And let one derive this law that the commandment of shaving overrides the prohibition against shaving, right, when you're a Nazir, or against shaving the corners of the beard, which applies to all Jewish men, or there's an extra commandment about priests that they should not do that. And so, right, so why does the verse state his beard? I'm sorry. And let one derive this law that the positive commandment of shaving overrides the negative prohibition from the term his beard, as it is taught in a baraisa. Why does the verse state his beard? It is because the verse states with regard to priests, neither shall they shave off the corners of their beards. Right, so it's an additional prohibition for priests. All Jewish men, you cannot destroy. It says destroy the corners of the beard. And about priests, it says, and you shall not shave the corners of your beards. It's an extra injunction for a priest. And therefore, one might have thought that the same prohibition against shaving one's beard would also apply to the Mitzorah. When he shaves his whole body, that he should not shave the corner of the beard. Therefore, the verse states his beard, right? That's why it says about the Mitzorah, he shall shave all his hair of his head and his beard, right? So the Torah adds his head and his beard to tell you that the Mitzorah has to do his whole body, and that commandment overrides the negative commandment not to destroy the corners of the beard, even if he's a priest. Now the Gemara asks, if so, why do I need the Torah to write his head? And why do I need it to write his beard? One source should suffice to teach that the shaving of a Mitzorah overrides any prohibitions that would be violated by that act. And the Gemara answers, no, both verses are necessary. As had the merciful one written only his beard and not written his head, I would say that the rounding of the entire head, in other words, shaving all the hair off one's head and not merely the sides, is not called a prohibited rounding. If that were so, the shaving of a Mitzorah's head would not be prohibited by Torah law. For this reason, the merciful one states his head, to teach that the shaving that the leper performs, that the Mitzorah performs, would be considered a prohibited rounding of the head had the Torah not come and commanded him, because of his need to be purified, to shave the corners, right? So what we have, and then we have this as a general principle, that when a positive commandment conflicts with a negative commandment, a negative prohibition, right? The Mitzorah shall shave at the end of his, to go through his purification after contracting tzara'as, and a Jewish man may not shave the corners of the beard, right? So now you have a conflict between a positive commandment and a negative commandment. So Reish Lakish would say, well, first you should see if there's any way that you can fulfill both without violating either. But if you can't, if there's no way to fulfill both the positive and the negative commandment at the same time, then the positive commandment will override the negative commandment. Right? Yeah. So now we're on 41b, very short page. And had the Torah written only his head and not written his beard, I would say that his head teaches two matters. First, that a positive mitzvah comes and overrides a negative commandment. And it also teaches that rounding the entire head is called rounding. And still, from where do we derive that a Mitzorah must shave with a razor? For this reason, the merciful one also wrote his beard. And we derive from the prohibition that prevents priests from destroying their beards that the removal of the beard involves the use of a razor. And so the Gemara asks, and Rabbi Eliezer, who derives his proof differently than the majority, from where does he derive the general principle that a positive mitzvah will come and override a prohibition if he's not getting it from the same place that the majority of the rabbis get it? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer derives it from the mitzvah of tzitzis, ritual fringes. As it is taught in a baraisa, this verse, you shall not wear diverse kinds, meaning you will not wear a garment of wool and linen. That's called shatnez, right? So a Jewish man, a Jewish person, cannot wear an article of clothing that contains both wool and linen together, right? Wool comes from a sheep. Linen comes from a plant, right? Usually from flax. So you don't combine them in a single garment, right? And so, for example, I once found a nice Hugo Boss suit. I was so happy. I got a great deal on it. And I was all excited to wear it. And then we happened to be at a Passover program, and there was a very experienced rabbi who was with us at dinner. I'm like, oh yeah, I got this great suit. And he's like, you didn't get a Hugo Boss suit, did you? Because there was a Hugo Boss outlet across the street from where the Passover program was. And I said, why, yes, I did. And he said, oh, they have a Shotnetz problem. I'm like, oy. So now I had to take my suit to the Shotnetz lab. That's just one particular place here in LA. There's other people that do this in many other places. And he examined it thoroughly, and yes, he found Shotnetz, and it was just in the lapel of the suit jacket. And so he removed that backing. It was a wool suit, right? So he removed the linen backing behind the lapel, and he replaced it with a different kind of felt that would work in that situation. And so it just, my good deal on the Hugo Boss suit, it did not end up being a very good deal, but it's a good suit. But at any rate, you can't wear wool and linen together. That's Shotnetz. However, you shall not wear Shotnetz, diverse kinds of wool and linen. But then the next verse in the Torah, right? So that's Deuteronomy 22:11. Deuteronomy 22:12 says, you shall make for yourself fringes, and they can be from them. Wool and linen. So interesting, right? So Jewish men wear tzitzis, right? So under my shirt, I have a very thin garment that has 4 corners, and it has the fringes, right? I wear them tucked in my pants. Some guys wear them out. And usually you sort of just avoid this problem, and the garment that holds the tzitzis is usually made of the same material as the tzitzis itself. But the fact is, they can be made from wool and linen, right? That the tzitzis can mix wool and linen. And so by juxtaposing the commandment of ritual fringes to the prohibition against wearing wool and linen together, the Torah teaches that the positive commandment of ritual fringes, which includes dyed blue wool, overrides the prohibition against wearing wool and linen together. So one may attach woolen ritual fringes to a linen garment. And from here, one derives the general principle that a positive mitzvah overrides a prohibition, right? So any 4-cornered garment is supposed to have fringes. The fringes need to be made out of wool. A 4-cornered garment doesn't have to be made of wool. It can be made out of linen. And so there you see that wool fringes would be attached to a linen garment, and it would come and override the Shotnetz prohibition. And from that principle right there, Rabbi Eliezer would learn out that the positive commandment overrides the negative commandment. And that concludes page 41 for us. We actually got a little bit of just a few words into page 42. So let me take some questions and comments. On page 41, my Google Doc has got to take a second to reload so that Nina can pass me some questions. How's everybody doing? Are we excited for Purim? Purim begins tomorrow night, and that means Tainus Esther is tomorrow day, right? So if you're Jewish, you have a fast to do tomorrow during daylight, right? So you can get up really early and have breakfast before sunrise, and then you can't eat again until you've heard the Megillah, which is after sunset, right? So we do the evening prayers, including reading the Megillah, and then we break the fast and initiate Purim. And that fast that we still honor, that Esther decreed, right? The Megillah, the book of Esther, is the story of Purim that we celebrate starting tomorrow night and Tuesday. And that fast commemorates a very important moment in Jewish history, right? Where the entire Jewish people who were living in the greatest empire the world had ever known, the Persian Empire, which sort of contained so much of the known world at that time, and all of the Jewish people lived within the 127 regions of the Persian Empire. And when Haman got Achashverosh to, accept his decree that all the Jews would be killed on the same day, a day selected by lottery, and that's what the word Purim means, lots, like lottery, tickets, as it were, lots. And so all the Jewish people were going to be killed on that day, and things looked really desperate. And so Esther said, I'm going to fast, join me in the fast, and let's all cry out to God. And every Jew in the world, and many of the Jews at that time were secular Jews, were disconnected from traditional observance. Sadly, as Jews have been throughout Jewish history, there's always some Jews who were disconnected, and then there were many Jews who were disconnected. But under that existential threat to the entire Jewish people, the Jewish people as a whole came together and cried out to God, please save us. And, the calamity was not only averted, but all our enemies ended up being destroyed. And the Jewish people enjoyed a period of great peace and prosperity, and it led directly to the rebuilding of the first temple. The events of Purim happened during the Babylonian exile, during that period between after the destruction of the first temple and before the building of the second temple. And it was Esther's own son who ended up being, she married the emperor, and her son became the emperor and authorized the building of the second temple. Okay, just a couple of questions. Can you wear a wool sweater over a linen shirt? The answer is yes. I mean, I think that right now we're not doing a deep dive on Shatnez. You can't, can you wear wool and linen at the same time? I think there's some opinion somewhere that you shouldn't, but generally speaking, I'm pretty sure that's not an issue. You don't think about, can I wear a wool sweater over a linen shirt? You do it. That's okay. What you can't wear is a single garment that is made out of both wool and linen together. Joseph, I found an appreciation for the division of labor within Judaism and halakhic experts who specialize in their own particular type of commandments to educate on whether it's shatnez or kosher, or whether something is kosher. Right, that there are specialists. Exactly. There are definitely, first there are poskim, right? So there are rabbis who are experts in the law whose expertise is answering halakhic questions for people. Which is a little different, right, than going for, marriage counseling or parental counseling or just learning Torah. Like when you just need a halakhic question answered, you'll go to a poskening rabbi. And sometimes you need a specialist, right? And so when it comes to shatnez, that's one of those specialties where you want somebody just to become an expert in that body of law. There's also, rabbis who are specialists in medical ethics, because that's such a big field, and other fields like that. Certainly people have specialties that way. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. We'll announce if there's any change to the time, because, I haven't thought that through. Because right now during the show is probably when the evening prayers would be and the Megillah reading, and we're going to have to attend to that. So we'll see if there's any time change. We'll put an announcement on the Facebook page about that. But remember also that on Tuesday at noon, we'll be doing our annual Megillah reading in English live on Facebook and YouTube. That's Tuesday at noon Pacific. One last question from Danny. Does Jewish law prohibit men from growing their hair long? Absolutely not. Not because of a Nazir vow, but just to wear their hair long. Thank you for your help in advance. No, you can wear your hair long. There are definitely Jewish men who wear their hair long. There is a prohibition for a man to dress like a woman. That is prohibited. And vice versa, I'm pretty sure, but definitely for a man to dress like a woman. But wearing the hair long is not necessarily, relegated to the realm of women. A man can have long hair, so I'm not aware of any prohibition for a man to have long hair. But as for being a Nazir, we're not allowed to take a vow of Naziris now, and haven't been since the temple was destroyed, because you cannot bring the offerings that a Nazir brings, neither at the conclusion of Naziris nor during Naziris if you become impure for the dead. So that would not be a route to wearing hair long, that you are prohibited to cut your hair. But you don't need to be a Nazir to have long hair. There's plenty of Jewish men and Orthodox Jewish men who have long hair. Okay. Have a great day, everybody. See you, God willing, tomorrow at the regular time, but we'll make an announcement if there's a